Earlier this week, when Joe Walsh announced he would be primarying Donald Trump in the 2020 race, I predicted that the media would be quick to whitewash his horrendous record because they want the drama of Donald Trump having a competitor on the Republican side. And it turns out I was at least somewhat wrong with, I think it was on MSNBC, they asked him pretty tough questions about his horrendous and racist tweets and past, but that does not mean that we have to stop putting pressure on Joe Walsh to at least continue to acknowledge what he has done to lay the groundwork for politicians like Donald Trump. And joining us now is someone who's done quite a bit of work in fleshing out the history of Joe Walsh. This is Carrie Levine, Deputy Federal Politics Editor for the Center for Public Integrity. Carrie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Glad to have you here, and I enjoyed your recent write-up about Joe Walsh. And so what do we need to know? If people are not familiar with his past, what are the important points to know about Joe Walsh?
I think the important thing to know is that Joe Walsh has had his own history of saying inflammatory things, of tweeting inflammatory things. And in jumping into the race, he also acknowledged that he laid some of the groundwork for getting Trump elected. And he's actually apologized for some of the things he said. So I think that that's something that's out there. And I'm definitely seeing people asking if he's the person they should support. If they have problems with the rhetoric that Trump has used, with the tone, they also have some questions about Joe Walsh.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not going to go through all of his tweets and anything, but it wasn't just that he was saying like outrageous things or anything like that. He was spreading conspiracy theories about Barack Obama and those sorts of things. And so it was certainly inflammatory. Beyond the comments, though, he's had his own issues in terms of like financial concerns, those sorts of things too, right?
That's correct. Joe Walsh, while in office and afterwards, really did have some questions about his own personal financial conduct. He and his former wife had a court case over what she said was his failure to pay child support. They later settled that and issued a joint statement saying Joe Walsh was not a deadbeat dad. But that's something that's come up repeatedly. When he left office, he owed $100,000 in legal fees. And so his financial background was dotted with some issues. At one point, the Chicago papers reported that his driver's license had been suspended because he had failed to pay the premiums on his high-risk car insurance. So there have been some financial issues, and it'll be interesting when he files the required financial disclosures to see what his personal financial picture looks like now. Since he's been out of office, he's been the host of a radio show for years. And so it'll be interesting to see if that financial picture is dramatically different than when he left office.
So it is interesting that he, like Trump, had for years tried to make a name for himself by saying outrageous things. Turns out also, like Trump, financial irresponsibility, not paying what he owes, those sorts of things. I wonder if he was ever the host of The Apprentice. Anyway, but what I'm curious about is generally primary opponents crop up when they perceive weakness in the candidate that's running, a possibility that they might lose. And look, Donald Trump's re-election chances are not by any means assured, but in terms of a primary, he's quite popular still amongst Republicans.
That's correct. He's repeatedly gotten very high poll ratings among Republicans. And he also has been fundraising for this since he took office. He started fundraising for his re-election campaign. Inauguration weekend, he filed the paperwork with the FEC. So he's got a real big head start. And Walsh has said he's confident he can raise enough money for a primary challenge. But I think that remains to be seen because the president certainly has a lot of money in his campaign coffers. Yeah, and he's continuing to raise it.
And so Joe Walsh, false confidence, that's another, to tick that off in the box of ways that he's trying to copy the president.
Well, we'll see, right?
Exactly, and so I'm curious then, I mean, I guess this gets a bit into the area of speculation, but if it will probably be more difficult for him to raise the money than he thinks right now. Donald Trump is very popular amongst Republicans. Walsh is by comparison virtually unknown. Do we have any idea what is actually generating his desire to go against Donald Trump?
That's a great question. I mean, just to take a step back, his fundraising has been spotty in the past. For example, he kicked off a super PAC after he left office, and I think it raised about $30,000, shut down relatively quickly, didn't find big donors or big success. So that's one example of a time when he thought he was going to be able to raise significant amounts of cash, really didn't. Whether that's going to be different this time, I don't know. In terms of why he'd do it, I think one thing, his position is that he's doing it on principle, that Trump deserves an opponent, that he thinks he can bring the fight to Trump. I think that certainly there's been speculation out there that he's putting himself back out there, raising his profile. And whether that'll work for him, we'll see how this goes. I think that former Massachusetts Governor Weld has been running against the president for some time as a primary challenger, hasn't really gotten much traction. Not sure I hear why Joe Walsh is going to have an easier time.
Yeah, he would not be my choice, but I'm not on that side. Carrie Levine, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.